morning. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me. And this work is in collaboration with Dr. Dana Würzberger, who's now at Stanford University. And would like to present some information about our longitudinal Israeli study of twins, where we've studied the moral development of children in what is possibly the most comprehensive study of children's moral development using behavioral genetic techniques. So the longitudinal Israeli study of twins includes over 1,000 pairs using a multivariate set of data with different ends depending on the different tasks that we had at every single age. And we're now starting our age 15 data collection. And when I say moral development, it could mean many different things. A lot of research is focused on age differences in moral development as compared to individual differences. Some other research has looked at moral reasoning, the more cognitive part, as compared to pro-social, the more behavioral part, moral emotions as well. Values, this has been hardly studied with children, but with adults we have lots of work on values. So it's a very, very broad construct. And indeed, one way to look at it is to talk about different emotion, cognition, and behavior aspects of morality. Where in the emotion, if we talk about pro-social in interpersonal behavior, in the emotion part, we have empathy, sympathy, compassion. In the cognitive part, we have what we think about others, our pro-social attitudes, kindness, pro-social values. And finally, in behavior, we have a long list of different behaviors such as nurturing, helping, and sharing. Is it one thing? Are they related? And how are they related? Do they represent shared environmental factors? Do they represent shared genetic factors? This is something that we were very interested in finding out. So for example, one study used questionnaire measures, and we asked parents to describe their children's pro-social behavior. We had different items measuring sharing, social concern, kindness, helping, and empathic concern. These were all 7-year-old twins. And we found a single common factor that accounted for most of the variance in most variables, with kindness as an exception. And then we said, okay, let's look at what happens with the twins. We looked at the correlations between twins. I don't need to represent the twin model anymore. And what we find is that for all the 5 variables, we have stronger correlations for monozygotic twins than for dizygotic twins. And there is one exception, which is kindness, where we see that the dizygotic correlation is also pretty high. And this is indeed the only of the 5 variables that has unique shared environmental variance. And the other variables have a meaningful genetic contribution of heritability running from 44% to 76%. And indeed, we can run a multivariate genetic model, and we can see that there's a common factor that is genetically influenced by 69%, and it loads on all of the items, all of the factors load on these higher order factors, and all of these factors also have their own unique genetic component and their own unique environmental component, and kindness has its own unique shared environment effect. So this is one set of findings. Another set of findings is to look at the motivation. We say kindness, do we mean that kids care about others? What do they think about others? Do they want other people to feel well? And so we looked at the construct called values, and this is Schwartz's definition: desirable abstract goals that are organized based on compatibilities and conflict, based on their underlying motivations, because there are different values with different motivations, and they are supposed to guide behavior. This is why they're interesting to us as students of moral development. They are supposed also to help people think about their values, but what we think is most important for our purposes is that values can guide behavior. And Schwartz has shown across hundreds of samples from all over the world, from Brazil to New Guinea, that values are organized in this 2-dimensional structure where we have openness to change as compared to conservation values as one major dimension. I'm not going to be talking about it. And the other dimension contrasts self-transcendence values, universalism, benevolence, where you think about others, you care for others, as compared to achievement and power, which are values of self-enhancement, when you focus on your own interests. And until recently, until about 10 years ago, nobody knew how to measure values in children until Anna Doring's group came and they devised this wonderful measure of values in children, where children get these cartoons, and each cartoon has a picture that describes somebody thinking about a value, wanting something, desiring something, and there is a small caption below the picture, and then kids have to rank these items based on how they would like to be in their life. And what we find is that when you run multidimensional scaling of these items, we get exactly the same structure, or almost exactly the same structure that Schwartz has described for adults. We find it with kids. We even showed it at the age of 5, which is the youngest known to me. So there's something about values, about the structure. Children who choose rich and powerful as highly important are less likely to choose help others as highly important, and vice versa, because this is one dimension of self-enhancement, self-transcendence that relates to behavior. So does it relate to behavior? At least in theory, it should relate to behavior, because helping others is motivationally against being rich and powerful, and the other way around. But does it happen, of course, does it relate to individual differences in behavior? So what we did that in another study where we looked, we let children share candy, chocolate coins in this case, between themselves and another person. And we had this dictator game, decisions, where children could choose to divide the chocolate candy equally or not equally, giving more to the other person, giving less to the other person. It could be either costly or non-costly. And in a previous study, we showed that values related to prosocial behavior even at the age of 5. We ran this again with the twins in our study at the age of 7 and then at the age of 8 and 9. And these are the correlations between the 10 values on the x-axis and prosocial behavior in the candy giving. So this is a real behavior. This is costly behavior. Children actually see the candy taken from them if they share it. And what we see is exactly as you would expect based on the content of values, is that values of self-transcendence, thinking about others, especially universalism, relate positively to prosocial behavior, whereas values of self-enhancement and especially power relate negatively to prosocial behavior. The results are stronger when there is a cost to the behavior than when there is no cost to the behavior. This again replicates what we found with non-twin children. So we find that values have a meaningful association with prosocial behavior. And of course, the interesting question now is, do we see any genetic relatedness between the two variables? And here we can see the correlations in monozygotic and dizygotic twins. Monozygotic are in dark blue. And we can see that for both values and costly sharing, we find a positive correlation for both kinds of twins, but a stronger correlation for monozygotic twins, indicating a genetic effect. When we look at the cross-twin, cross-trait correlation, so these are the results that we define on the left. But when you look at the cross-twin, cross-trait correlation, what we find, this is on the right, we find that if we take one twin's values and the other twin's behavior, we find about the same correlation for monozygotic twins, as if it was the same child. But we find a much lower correlation for the dizygotic twin. After all, it's not the same child. And this is an indicator of a genetic relatedness between a genetic overlap between the values, between values and between prosocial behavior. And we can use this to run a multivariate genetic analysis with prosocial behavior at the age of 7 and 8 and 9 and values at these ages. And this is exactly what we find. We find a genetic effect of 21 to 44% on both prosocial behavior and values. And we find, of course, a non-shared environment effect, no evidence for a shared environment effect here. And we also find some stability in both prosocial behavior and values across an almost 2-year gap. What we don't find is a cross-lagged effect. So we didn't find any evidence for prosocial behavior affecting values or the other way around. Possibly we're not addressing the right age for that. Maybe something else is happening. But what we did find is that there was a genetic correlation of 0.70 or 0.74 between prosocial behavior and values at both ages, which tells us there's something genetic going on that drives the variance towards being either high on prosocial behavior and prosocial values, or low on prosocial behavior and prosocial values. So a shared genetic factor is related to both behavior and values in the case of prosocial behavior and values. Let me just conclude. We find that different morality constructs interrelate positively within a domain. For example, when we talk about prosocial behavior, then positive emotions, prosocial positive emotions, prosocial values, and actual prosocial behavior tend to correlate positively. It would be interesting to increase this to other values. For example, values of self-direction could relate to behaviors of mastery. And another possibility is that the value system may serve as an organizing structure for the association between different behaviors. So behaviors that are based or related to the same values would be related at the phenotypic level in terms of behavior, or the other way around. Behaviors that are opposed to each other are related to opposed values. For example, universalism and power will be also negatively related in behavior. Although we have to remember that this overlap is only moderate. It calls for understanding of discrepancies. For example, what happens when your values don't fit behavior. Etiological differences. We saw, for example, that kindness is its own story. It's not the same as empathic concern, for example. What does it mean that there's a genetic overlap between one trait and values? Does it mean an underlying joint cause? Does it reflect a third variable, maybe some brain structures? This is all an open question that we'd like to answer in the next few years. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my students and my funders. Thank you.